years, and it was really a lot about corporate, right? Meeting and marketing, and there's so many aspects outside of who's on the ice and what lines are going to be going. And he did leave it, from everything I gathered, to his general manager and his coach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know the inner workings of the relationship between Brendan Shanahan and Brad Treliving. I'm not going to pretend, and Craig Berube, I'm not going to pretend to know that. What I'm going to say is there's some owners in professional sports, and certainly in the NHL, that don't really feel they need an intermediary between the GM, who's calling the shots hockey-wise, and themselves. They feel they can just reach out to their GM, and they don't need that extra layer. We've seen in Canadian markets where we seem to have that, whether it's in Vancouver, whether it's in Montreal, we see that in most Canadian markets, there is that intermediary, and how much they're involved in the business side of things, because MLSE is an incredibly huge business, and how much they're involved in the hockey side of things. So that's interesting. That is an interesting sort of comment to make, Nick and Justin. And I think, there's going to be a president. I don't think they're suddenly just going to say, well, we don't need a president anymore. But there are teams that operate without that buffer. I mean, look at the Dallas Stars, right? They're a team. They have their ownership, and below their ownership, there's Jim Nill, who's the GM, and they don't really have an extra layer, an extra person there. And obviously, things are working very well for the Dallas Stars. So every group's different. How much say Brendan Shanahan had in the hockey part of things, I'm not sure.
Well, it did change, though. It did change. Evolved, right? It evolved. It went from Lou, obviously, to Kyle. Those guys seem to have more control on the day-to-day part. And then even recently with Brad Treliving, I think it did force Brendan to focus more on the hockey department than the business of the Leafs the last year and a half. So in essence, though, it may have been too late, right?
Well, one thing, Nick, is there was certainly a philosophical change between the way Kyle Dubas oversaw this team and the way Brad Treliving, and he made it very clear from the day he walked in the office. Brad Treliving is someone who is from the same school as Brian Burke as far as the hockey product and what will cause success on the ice. And he said it. Brian Burke used the adjective truculence, and Brad Treliving, used it, very clearly, said we need more snot on this team. Kyle Dubas was more reluctant to speak in those terms. He always thought, puck possession,
skill,
power play, skill. And I think Brad Treliving said, we love the skill, we need more will. And I'm not sure where Brendan Shanahan played out. He might have seen it from both sides. He's a very smart and thoughtful hockey executive. And how much of his input and imprint was there with Brad Treliving? Again, I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, I think all it comes down to is you have a decade to sort of figure out where this team is going, to get it to as far a place as it can go. And if it doesn't meet the expectations of the fan base, the media, but most importantly, internally what the expectations were, then there's going to be changes. We just saw this in Los Angeles, and we're seeing it now, and we saw it in the New York Islanders, and we're seeing it now, here in Toronto. And I just, I don't think we should need to read much more into it than it was maybe the natural evolution that, this was sort of the last kick of the can for both some of the players. We know the core group's going to change, and for some of the management as well. I think it's just sort of all goes hand in hand.
Kip, this is as much for you as DA, but as he leaves, is there really anything you can point to organizationally where you'd say this is something they got to do better? I have the one beef.
Yeah.
What's yours? Go ahead.
Public relations.
That's it. That's exactly what mine is.
Of course it is, because we've worked for 4 years together.
Yeah, well, it's the similar complaints, and I can't speak DA.
They got to get reconnected with the fans. With the fans.
It does feel right now, DA, that expectations. It kind of feels like the fans are a little taken for granted. I just know personally, I've been doing the show with 4 years for Nick. We've never talked to Austin Matthews. Not once. So some of that stuff to me, I feel like would work for the fans a little bit more to bring down the wall a bit.
Yeah. I agree with you guys. I really would like to see more access. I don't think it's a bad thing. I understand. And, we had Lou Lamoriello, who wouldn't allow us to speak to any of the rookies in their rookie season.
Right.
Austin Matthews scores 4 goals in his first game as a Maple Leaf. And, our poor ringside reporter is asking Brad Boys, what's it like watching Austin Matthews score 4 goals? Yeah, it's so implausible. It's laughable because
it's laughable.
Seem like,
yeah.
PR 101. And again, I don't want to be sitting here crapping on anyone, but I philosophically believe the media doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's a liaison to the fans.
Yeah.
And the more access you have, they get to see these great personalities. They get to see these great characters. They get to see this great will. There's a fine line. I get it. You want to protect these young 18-year-old players as they come into the league, but there's something that ends up causing a level of resentment sometimes through the media or through the fan base if they feel, they're held on a pedestal, but they're not necessarily always held accountable, or we're not getting a chance to see the human side.
Mm-hmm.
And access has been a real issue. And I think that's something that philosophically I'd like it from the top, them to discuss it. What are the upsides and what are the downsides? And at the end of the day, I've always said, look, I interview a lot of people, as do you. They have control of the interview. As the interviewer, we can guide where it's going, but they always have the choice to be like, yeah, I'm not comfortable talking about that. Or I'd rather, next question, let's talk about something else. Or I don't have a comment on that. I don't have a thought on that. The person you're asking controls what's coming out of their mouths. So I've always felt like as much as I can control some of the areas with which the discussion will go, ultimately I'm at the mercy of what the interviewee has to offer. And, again, I've always said I'm not Mike Wallace walking in there trying to, bring down the doors. If you don't know who Mike Wallace is, the old journalist on
Gotcha.
60 Minutes. But, I don't mean you, but it's, some of the younger listeners and viewers. We're a liaison for the team. We're there. I'm always of the mindset. I'm an enthusiastic sports fan. I want to promote the game. I want to promote the players. I want to tell good stories. It's not about bringing people down. And certainly there's got to be accountability held, but I don't think the average person in sports broadcasting in the media is there to destroy lives and destroy careers. I think it's about, let's embrace the great moments and let's share it all together, because there's such a passion, especially with a fan base of a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think a lot of that's just been forgotten throughout the years. And I'm not sure why, because when I broke into this business back with the Matt Sundins and everyone else, the relationships were much stronger. Nick, you played in the 1990s, and, it feels like there's a lot more acrimony now between the fan base and the players and the media and the players, and it really doesn't have to be that way.
As the price keeps going up to
Right.
go watch these players. You are watching and listening to David Amber, studio host, Hockey Night in Canada, NHL on Sportsnet in Dallas, covering the Oilers and the Stars. So I think in Keith Pelly's press release, he talked about, if I'm not mistaken, Sam, a new voice. And if it is, do we expect someone in to come in at a president type of position, or do we expect it to disappear and stay in the hands of just Brad Treliving, which Elliott reported will be back next season? We know Craig Berube's not going anywhere. So what do you expect on if there is a different voice in charge at what level?
Wow, that's a very tough question to ask as someone who's not inside.
Okay.
Those walls.
Let me rephrase it. Do you expect a new voice